Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We're continuing a short two-part series talking about the Enneagram Prison Project.
So in the last episode, we talked to Susan Alesic with the Enneagram Prison Project, who is the founder of the project. And this week, we're going to be talking to Sue Lambert, who is the ambassador liaison for the Enneagram Prison Project. So I'd like to say welcome to Sue Lambert for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I'd also like to say welcome back, Susan Alesic, on the Personality Hacker Podcast.
Thank you, Antonia. So glad to be back again.
So, Sue, you are the ambassador liaison for this project. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do for, can I just call it EPP? I'm sure that's what you guys call it. Right?
That's what we call it.
I facilitate our reconnecting or reentry meetings for people that took our course when they were incarcerated, are released. So I do a welcoming back to the community and checking in with them, and then get them lined up with our class schedule. And then I facilitate the class. I have a co-teacher, co-guide, and we do the classes twice, soon to be 3 times a month in a couple of different areas to keep people in touch with us and to continue working on themselves as they settle back in. Then we also help with the people that want to go forward further and become one of our ambassadors. Ambassadors, they stay connected. They continue to do their work. They help out at events. Sometimes we'll be on panels, and we even support them if they want to become an Enneagram guide and go back inside and teach, which I was able to do. So, because that's where I started.
So last week when we were talking to Susan, you mentioned that there were guides, and guides were people who actually go in and work with those who are incarcerated. And it sounds like ambassador is something slightly different than a guide.
An ambassador started on the inside, like I did. That's where I took the course almost 5 times, I think, when I was incarcerated. But one of the things that's highly promoted by the guides inside is the reconnecting program that we have on the outside, with the goal that anyone that wants to continue on, we support them to get the training to go back inside to teach this, because we're actually, the best example of the program.
Yeah. So I'm dying to hear your story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started with this, like when you were on the inside?
Prior to getting on the inside, I was pretty spiraling down with addictions and personal struggles, and ended up committing a crime with a co-defendant of mine, friend of mine, and ended up in jail. Someplace I really thought I wasn't never going to be on the inside of a prison or a jail, which now I've been inside both. I just was bound and determined to figure out how that happened. I thought maybe I was just defective, just like mentally off. That's how I ended up in such a situation. Or was there some way to figure out what was wrong with me? I started taking a couple of the classes they offered, cognitive behavior type classes. They focus mostly on how to react now, how to catch yourself now. And then this organization came in, Enneagram Prison Project, and showed a video. And in the video, there was these big guys, covered with ink and tears, talking about how this changed their lives. I thought, look, I'm going to try this. So I signed up for and started taking the class. At first I was pretty skeptical about it. The first day in the class, I looked at the symbol and I was like, oh my God, it looks like witchcraft. It's like the symbol is like, oh, what does this mean? But soon as we got into the program, it was like they took me back into my life as far back as I could remember. And it's been a journey ever since that first class. It's changed my life.
So what was, just tell me something about, I've never been to prison or to jail, and I have a vision of what it is supposed to be like. Like I have a perception of it. I've been in a jail before, but I've never had to go in to be incarcerated. And I'm guessing you had a specific vision of what jail or prison was going to be like, and then you got in there. It's probably very different than what you perceived it to be like. Am I correct in that, or was it about what you expected?
Well, I didn't really give it much thought, to be honest with you. I identify with type 1 of the Enneagram. I pretty much ran most of my life with, if you're in there, you deserve to be in there kind of thinking.
Gotcha.
Didn't give it much thought, but believing that people, have to pay something back to society for being involved in a crime. I continue to believe that. But what I found is that I thought being punished was losing your freedom, being taken away from your family, being locked up, being told when to eat, drink, shower, and that was punishment, loss of all that. But what I found is that the punishment only just begins when you get there, because now there's a whole new set of punishment that you're going to have to deal with and how you're going to be able to survive. That varies between jail and prison on the severity of staying alive and how to survive and how to cope. It's really not a very good place to be able to heal, because if you're always having to watch out for your safety and what's next, it's really hard to do self-work. But I found that when I was able to take this class, things that I had never learned in my life, like meditation, taking a breath, understanding why I'm reacting the way I am, why am I going to that anger, why am I doing this? Being able to have that as coping skills helped me to make it through it. It's pretty harsh, is the best way I could put it.
So you're talking about the vigilance of having to survive the other people who are incarcerated with you. It's not just the context, not just the system. It's like you're in a situation where you have to maintain vigilance all the time.
Like I said, that varies. When I was incarcerated in the county jail, I was probably in one of the better county jails. In fact, I'm sure I was in one of the better county jails. That particular county is open to programming and self-help, teaching people how to understand themselves. And they have a really great way of helping you somewhat feel safe. The prison system is a lot harsher and a lot different. And for me, the prison system was really a test of everything, of survival, of coping. There's like really not a lot of safe haven in prison. You really have to just maneuver yourself. You're pretty much being lonely. That's absolutely for sure. There's no one to go to. It's not like you could say, I want to talk to room service, or I want to make a complaint to the management, because they don't want to hear it. So it's a very tough place. Yes.
And so that's the context you find yourself in when you start doing your growth work. As you mentioned, it's not a very friendly place to start doing healing work. We talk all the time to people about the need to prepare yourself mentally and sort of physically prepare yourself for healing work being something that is not a gentle process in and of itself. And so, because you've got all this stuff coming up for you, you've got all these traumas, all these emotions, all these things that's been like maybe pounding at the door for years and years and years that you're finally addressing. And there's a reason why you were running in the first place, right? Because it's all very painful stuff. So can you walk through the process of, you mentioned learning meditation, you learned some of these techniques and tools, but can you walk through the process of being in a space like that, but still contending with some of these demons, contending with some of these challenges that came up for you while you were present, while you were opening yourself up to this healing work?
Well, myself and most of the people that I've been incarcerated with, they have not had any kind of occasions in their lives where they were offered self-awareness training. It's really new territory. Susan was talking earlier about, the harshness or the environment that some people grew up in, which varies for everybody. In most of the cases, it's really a tough place it's not like the YMCA offers personality classes for you to go in and sit and take. With the Enneagram class, one of the things that happens is there's a certain amount of homework and reading. With that comes the discovery. And I remember in the jail, when the class was first offered, the women that I was housed with at the time, the excitement that they brought back after the class to the pod when they were trying to figure out their personality type. And they were actually able to read about something, because I think a lot of us in there think that we just got dealt a hand in our life and get over it, right? Stuff it, move on. You have other things to take care of. I mean, I could go on and on, but here we were able to stop and take a breath and have to look back at some of that pain that we've been carrying. There's lots of pain in prison and jail. I have to say, it's like in my mind, I used to picture this in prison, a dark green cloud over the place that never left. because there were so many women in so much pain that, ends up going into anger, and that it was just really, really heavy. And I just didn't see a lot of hope there. As opposed to when I was incarcerated in jail with the class, the hope that people get by taking the class is that maybe they can find a way. Maybe they can find a better way to live. And that's why I'm so involved with the reentry afterwards. We call it reconnecting. That's why I'm so involved in it, because it's not like your personality just gets healed and goes away. It's like something that is always with you. And it's how can you cope with that? How can you be aware of it? How can you know when that thing happens or that trigger comes, that you can have a different way of thinking and processing, and you can sit with your own pain? It's like nobody wants to sit with their own pain in or out of jail. A lot of people they want to do anything to numb it. Party, drink, go skiing, go here. And a lot of what we do is help people learn how you could sit with your own pain and you can heal. It can be really, truly an enlightening experience if you can make it through it. And that's what we try and do. We try and hold that for them.
I think it's powerful what you're talking about, your story, because I'm listening to you talk, Sue, and you're painting this picture of an incarcerated prison situation for yourself at a low point in your life. My suspicion is, I'm guessing it was not a high point of your life. And there's pain everywhere around you. It's unsafe. It's not a safe space at all. Like, you're physically in danger. You're emotionally not protected. Like you said, there's no one to complain to or talk to. And I think maybe somebody listening right now who doesn't have that experience, and they go to maybe a personal growth workshop or something, and they're complaining about the tea being cold or, oh, my seat's uncomfortable, or I don't know if I feel comfortable to share in this environment because I'm a little nervous. Like, there are people who are brave like yourself who've been through way more, and you've risen up and you've decided, you know what, I'm going to take control of my life. I'm going to make differences. I'm going to grow myself in what arguably could be some of the worst conditions possible to do so. You still were able to do that. So first of all, I look at you as a beautiful human being who was able to grow in a space where that's very difficult to do. Now, you had some help with the class and the Enneagram system, but it really speaks to you and who you are as a person, Sue. And I want to extend gratitude for you as a person. And not only have you grown, but now you want to give back. You're helping people do the same thing in that same environment. So massive gratitude to you. And it's a reframe for me when I bitch and moan or complain about my tea being cold or not being comfortable enough when I want to learn or do something. I'm going to remember this conversation in those moments and remember how blessed I truly am. I think it's a good reframe for people to hear in a lot of ways.
Yeah, like a flower growing through concrete, right? Like that indomitable human spirit. What are some of the I also want to thank you for sharing your experience. What are some of the stories that you've been able to observe of other people who have been incarcerated that have gone through a similar process as you?
Well, we have other ambassadors. I love them. I'm really proud of them. If they were here right now and you were to hear their stories, it's like I'm humbled in my story by listening to their stories. But we're talking mostly men that we have as ambassadors, and some of them have spent more of their life incarcerated than they were free. They're solid. I don't want to say that like, oh, we're all great, we're all better, and everything's fine and perfect now, because I thank you, Joel, what you said about me. And I listened to you and I thought, if he only knew that my type 1 and me and my personality, it's like I still can struggle on a daily basis with when I see things that are unjust or unfair and I want to make things right. And I can get stuck. I can get stuck in thinking that my way is the best way and everybody needs to listen to me because I have the way to fix it. And this is like ongoing stuff. This is what I've learned from the program. And I say that because that's the same thing with my fellow ambassadors. It's like when we meet, it's like we need that. We need that reminder of ourselves. We need to be reminded of ourselves in a compassionate way with space so that we can be able to feel safe and make better choices. And I'm really proud of them. But I would not want to share their personal stories only because maybe in the future you can invite them and they would be happy, I'm sure, to come and tell you their stories themselves. But they have had some pretty rough upbringings, and they're really great people.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Sue, from your perspective as an ambassador who has gone through the process of being introduced to this concept when incarcerated all the way up to being ambassador liaison, what do you think is something really important that that the listener can know about this work? Like, what do you think is one of the best ways to really grasp the power of what you've experienced, and maybe even the importance of volunteering or supporting the Enneagram Prison Project from your perspective?
Well, I think for sure healing, being able to do that self-parenting and do the healing, forgiving is huge. Realizing that maybe things that happen to us are happening from people that are broken. Being able to have some compassion about that is something I've been able to walk away with. It's not easy, but it's like it's really, I think, what needs to change in this system, because we don't do that. We put people in a box in prison with bars, and we expect them to get out and be different because they've been abused and punished. I mean, you wouldn't wish that on a dog. How can we do that with human beings? Taking the time to help people realize their worth, that they're worthy. I've talked to guys when they've gotten out and they're really having a rough time, and I've looked at them and reminded them that they're worthy of doing this work, and they cry, because that's something that's so easy to forget after your whole life you've been told you're not. And I think that's a big thing that this program brings to people.
So a question for either Susan or Sue: how do you speak to people who give you pushback? I'm sure you get the feedback frequently that people who are in prison are there because they deserve it, because they've committed a crime and they're doing their time, and that these resources could better be served for people who are not, who are like responsible citizens, or somebody who is a more contributing member of society, because of the stereotypes that you talked about, that people have, the tendency to see a person who's in prison as sort of no longer worthy of any attention. How do you respond to people who might give you pushback on that level? And how do you speak to it to help people sort of massage their hearts and feel a little bit more compassion?
Well, a lot of the work I've done since I was released was working with another nonprofit that helps people find jobs. And part of my job was to go out and find and talk to companies to be second chance companies. The thing is that I believe that I had to go to jail. I mean, I committed a crime, and I hurt people by my crime. And I believe in that punishment. I believe that. But I also believe that while the person's freedom is taken away and they're locked up, that as a society, we want to make that person better before they get back out. What we do right now is not doing that. It's not helping them. It's putting them right back into that same situation in a lot of cases where only the strong will survive, or they'll be back in prison. So I guess what I would say to people is I definitely agree with you that we have to have a system that people have to pay for their crimes. But I also think that we have to have some compassion with that and be able to help them heal. And so that when they get out, they could have a better life, and in turn, not commit crime and live in society with everyone else and struggle like everybody else on trying to just make it. That's what I would say. Sure, Susan's answer might be different.
Well, I appreciate, and I've heard many, many people say going to prison saved my life. So I think there's an honesty in as much as I think you knew you needed something to hold you because you weren't able to hold yourself. You also had a lot of, willingness to go in and turn yourself in and get yourself back on track, right? That's also part of where you were at. And I would say to people who are cynical, cynicism is a reflection of how we're hurting. It's okay to have a cynical mind. It's okay to be there, because that we come by our personalities, and that's an aspect of part of our personality. We come by these things innocently. So my first curiosity would be, why the cynicism? And also to pick up on what Sue was sharing for all of us, that when people do get released, and the majority of people are released back out into society, they become our neighbors. And who do we want to be living next door? People who are more hurting than they were when they went in the first place, or people who have actually figured out how to care for themselves and for their neighbors? That's really what we need. Teaching self knowing, which is the most powerful knowledge in the world, and self-love is the thing that heals the fabric of our society. It's needed.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I mean, I don't actually know what the original thought behind prison was, but it almost feels like the adult version of a timeout. And if you've got kids in timeout, the last thing you want to do while you're telling them to go think about what they did is to cause a bunch of distressing distractions for them so that they can't actually do the work that you put them in timeout to do to begin with. So if prison is an attempt not just to punish but also to reform, to encourage thoughts, to think about what you did, then providing resources and tools actually help them in that process. And then it becomes something that, like actually works. Like, what is the intent of prison to begin with? That's sort of the first thing that comes up for me. And I feel like what I appreciate about your work is that you're trying to build a more sustainable model, the model of provide resources and tools while a person is in that situation. Because while there might be vigilance, the one thing that is on your side in that situation is time. You've got all this time on your hands. And so there's a lot that can be done with time. You just mentioned somebody saying that it saved my life, maybe because it provided time and an ability to actually reflect. And it's easier to reflect when you aren't in a situation where, say, you're having to be constantly vigilant, right? Then you have tools to be able to actually be in that place of presence.
For sure. And what you're saying is real. People have more time to reflect, and they have all kinds of stressors when we get out, of having to pay my bills, just having to figure out how to get a car, how to get enough to eat, how to go visit my kids that I have all these restrictions on, how to get myself out of debt. I mean, it's so stressful. And Sue can talk about that better than anybody. When people are about to get out, their anxiety is way up. It's much easier to work with somebody who's incarcerated for life and self-selects into our program than it is to work with somebody who's in for 9 weeks, because the stresses are really just barely at bay. And other people can kind of sink into the hard time it takes to actually pull off these layers. And Sue's done that. I also want to just highlight, because I don't think we got to hear your full story, Sue, that you doing something and getting in trouble with yourself is an aspect of your life, and doing time in jail and then prison is another aspect of your life. But there was a prison made for you in childhood that was not your choice. I'm just wondering if you can speak to that in some way to help us to understand what happened to you that set you up. And I don't mean so that you don't take responsibility, because I know I don't mean that. But what happened to you that put you in a place where you used your personality and got into a lot of trouble with it?
I until I really looked back into my life, it's just the life that the hand I was dealt, so to speak. One of the homework assignments we do in the class is we write a bio about our childhood in the third person. And, going back in my life, there's quite a bit of abuse, different kinds of abuse. The first abuses for me were punishment, with my father, who was an alcoholic. Of course, at the time, you don't know what's going on when you're that young, but I would remember just like being outside and having him jerk me into the house, and he would start my sister and myself. He would separate us, take us in the bathroom, rip our clothes off, put us over the porcelain bathtub. And I mean, it sticks in my head how cold it was. Then he would put water on his hands, run the sink. I learned later to create more pain. And he would just start beating us. That was how I grew up. It put me in a position where I remember early on thinking, if I can just do everything right, if I could just do everything perfect, that I could just slip away and not be in that position. And, it's still sad for me today now when I think back, because as a kid, I didn't know that, I didn't know how sick he was. He was my parent. And it just made me think how bad I was. There was some other abuses after that, different types of abuses that took place. I was just always trying to maneuver into a place that I thought was right.
I think there's something so important about how you say, I didn't know how sick he was, because as children, what we know is that we need our parents. That's biological. There's a drive for that. So you staying connected to your dad required you to disconnect from yourself. And that is the worst kind of disconnection there is, the worst kind of abandonment. I really appreciate you putting context around your life, and I can appreciate that sadness diminishes every time you touch it. It feels really honest, and it feels really important that anybody that's listening to understanding that you were eventually convicted of doing a crime, that there were things that happened to you that were criminal long before you had choice.
Yeah, of course, that my life after that was pretty I was pretty much alone. And by the age of 12, I started drinking, maybe 11 or 12. And after that, it was alcoholism by early teens and blackouts. It was my coping. And when I got to jail, none of this seemed like it mattered. What mattered is that I let everybody down again. I had taken money from people that trusted me. I was worthless, and I had addictions, several of them at the same time. I just couldn't figure out how I got there. I mean, I knew how I got there for my crime, but in my whole life, all I ever tried to do was be good, do right, be responsible. And it's like, there I was. And so when I was able to unwind this, I actually was in there long enough and took the class enough times where one of the things we use in the class now is the ACE test, Adverse Childhood Experience. I've actually written about every one of the worst abuses where I was alone and had to endure them, always walking away thinking it was my own fault. That's self-parenting that I think I heard you guys talking about earlier, that I was able to go back and hold myself, to heal, and to forgive my dad, and to forgive my mom for not stepping in. Each time I was able to do that, it was like unpacking.
Thank you, by the way, for sharing something so personal and probably very painful that you've been through, some of these experiences. And I just thank you very much for sharing openly and being vulnerable enough to do that. I hear in what you're talking, if you want to talk a little bit about type just for a moment, I hear type 1 come through here. You basically, you started off the conversation talking about how you had to take responsibility. That's the word I attached to your story. You were in prison. You realized you're like, well, I deserve to be here. I need to take responsibility for being here. And then I hear you talk about when you're in your childhood, you're type 1, taking responsibility and trying to be perfect and good. It almost seems like your type 1 was the challenge and the solution in some ways. And I don't know the nuance there for you personally and how you see the difference between having to be perfect for everybody when you're young and then take on kind of the responsibility when you're older. I don't know if you have anything you've thought about through that to speak to specifically, just to kind of see how that might work for somebody listening, or even how it worked for you, if there's any understanding or insight that you've pulled from your own life there.
And when I first took the quiz, the little questionnaire, and I read about type 1, it's like I really didn't like what I read. And I was like, I don't even like this person. And,
I think that's for all of us. All of us, when we read our Enneagram type the first time, we don't like what we're reading.
I think that's a clue. And but then I took all the tests in front of the chapter in our book for all the types, and that's like even my type 1 showing up and doing. I had to be sure, had to be right. But I think that with my personality is something that I think helped to save my life. But it's like a double-edged sword. It's like it can also go and take me down. Not understanding anything about personality, when I was learning, I could see how my health just deteriorated to a lower place. And I can also see how it came back. And I could also see all the wonderful things in my personality about wanting things to be better for people, wanting things to be aligned, wanting things to work better, being an advocate, having that passion. And that's also my personality. So it's that balance.
Well, I think what this speaks to is, somebody that's not working in the way you're working with this system. Sometimes we can get caught up so much in the type itself or the system itself. And we want to talk about all the nuances and all these like intricate things about what it means to be a type 1. And what I hear in what you're saying is, look, you can be a type 1 and be over perfectionistic and cause challenges in your life. You can be a type 1 and have that passion and excitement and own things in your life. Like the type doesn't matter. It's how you're applying yourself. It's how you're choosing to grow or start from the point of whichever type you are. It's really what you do with that knowledge that matters. It's really how you move through the world. It's how you grow yourself. And the growth is the part. Like the type helps you maybe access it and maybe makes it gives you some reasons why maybe some things evolved in your life, but then it's up to you as a person. And I don't mean you, Sue, specifically. I mean, one as a person, somebody listening right now, or even myself. It's up to us to understand about ourselves, but then it's on us to grow ourselves in the way we want to be moving forward. And I think that's really the message I take away from what you're saying, is that type can go either way. It's a double-edged sword. It can kind of harm you or help you. It's up to the operator of the person that's their personality. That's the important thing.
And I think that what you're saying is accurate and interesting, that the more personality we see, the more cover somebody has for the pain. The personality is really this word Russ Hudson uses that I love, which is an echo of something good. It's like a reminder of the intelligent impulse that we start with. When we say, well, it's up to us to use it for something good, we can't even access it until we get more present. And the trick is, how do we get more present? I think what's so important about what Sue's saying about her own childhood and how the punishment and the abuse and the neglect and all the things that happened to her caused her to disconnect from herself, and therefore rely on what she had, which was her personality. And our personality, starts with this essential thing. And if we had parents that met us and said, "Oh my God, like the essence of type 1 is this goodness," if somebody around her saw like, "Oh, you are such a good little egg," then she would connect with that alignment that she had in herself, and that's what would grow, and that's how she would operate in the world, and that's what the world would get to see in her. She didn't have that. She had parents who were in pain themselves, who were disconnected from themselves, and therefore could not see her. In fact, who physically hurt her. And so she shut down. And as we all do, right? No matter, you don't have to have a horribly abusive childhood to shut down to the essential part of ourselves. But the bigger the traumas around us, the more we shut down to that, the more we armor up. Imitation of that essential quality, the mimicry of our goodness, that's the ego, right? So the more personality we see, the more armored up somebody is, the more they must have been hurting. And I think that is why our impulse has been now that Enneagram Prison Project is really on the ground and thriving, and we know we'll go and go. I mean, Enneagram Prison Project is growing the rest of us. We are trying to keep up. That makes so much sense that the logical next place for us to be is to be working with the youth, and to be working with teens, and to be working with the part of our society that our society still has ready compassion for. You put an adult, like back to your earlier question, Antonia, you put an adult in front of somebody who's murdered somebody, there's not a lot of compassion for that. But if you take a 11-year-old child who's murdered somebody, maybe their parent for hurting their other parent, now all of a sudden people have a harder time just condemning that child. And so it's time, I think, to broaden where we're taking this approach, and to really to look at the things that are happening to our youth, so that we can repair the fabric of our society, like we've been talking about.
Do you, as we kind of wrap up here, I think this exercise of writing a biography of your childhood could be really useful for somebody listening. Is it like an entire class you have to take to do it, or is there something you could give us, like a couple little pointers on how someone might be able to do that? I think just the insight of doing something like that is powerful in its own right.
I think the very important part is that it is in the third person for a reason, so that we can have our inner observer, witness what happened to that little person, to have some objectivity, some space from where it was. And I think that the writing of the biography is incredibly healing. But I've often heard this quote by Gurdjieff, who said, "It's not just difficult to do the work by ourselves, it's impossible." So it's not just the writing of the biography, but it's the witnessing of it. And so make sure that it gets into the hands of somebody who can receive it, and who can see you, and who can do what our guides do for those who are in custody, is to reflect back to them the intelligence behind all the ways in which we fought our childhood off and armored ourselves up. And it can be put in the compassionate context. I think that's really key.
The inside, we get a response to the bios that we write. When I saw somebody that I respected and looked up to, that was teaching a class, that took the time to write back to me and to validate that what happened to me wasn't right, and that I didn't deserve that, it was a validation that it was like so healing. I mean, it was more than just those words, but it was just another step in this course, which every week there was some type of program, homework, discussion, work that helped heal. That's why I'm doing this now. It's like I'm a grandma. I'm busy with my grandkids. They're like the light of my life. I could be busy all the time, but my compassion right there with my family is the Enneagram and the project, because I've seen it make a difference in my life, how I interact with my family, how I cope with my own life day to day, the people I work with. It's just been a huge difference, and I hope other people will get involved in this program. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. We have a saying here, I think we stole it from someone, but we've been saying it a lot when people talk about finding purpose and finding their mission. We say your mess is your message. And it sounds like that's what happened, is you amalgamated and alchemized your mess, the challenges you had to go through in life, into a message, into a way to help other people. So we as two individuals, two people on the planet, are just very grateful that you did that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So once again, if you are interested in reaching out to support the Enneagram Prison Project, through either volunteering your time or donation, Susan, would you let us know once again how you can be reached and ways that people can support you?
You can reach us at enneagramprisonproject.org. And right now we are really grateful for the philanthropy that supports our projects on the inside. We are often starting in new facilities on our own dime, because that's how people start to understand the value of what we do. So we really appreciate your generosity. And we're also really looking for people who are well-trained Enneagram teachers who would like to be delivering our program in custody. And we have a training program for that. You can see on the training page of our website. And we're also really wanting to know what's stirring in your heart, and what do you see that you could lend to this project? Maybe we don't even know what your talents are. So please just reach out to us and let us know who you are and how you've been touched, and we will follow up with you.
Thank you, Susan and Sue, for being here on Personality Hacker. We really appreciate both of you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share about our passions. Thank you both.
Thank you, guys.
It's our pleasure, and we want to bring attention to what you guys are doing. If you're listening right now, I think the action step from this, like I said on the last episode, is go to the enneagramprisonproject.org or enneagramprisonproject.org, no the in there, and I think we can all donate at least $5 today. And hopefully you can do more. You can contribute more, maybe become a regular contributor. Also, there's volunteer opportunities for you. So let's go ahead and just make that our action step today at the end of the show. Except if you do have comments or questions or a story you'd like to share about what's coming up for you in this conversation, come over to personalityhacker.com, and directly below this show, let's get a conversation started, a discussion started about some of the things we've been talking about today.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.